The sinking of the Titanic is one of the most famous and tragic stories of all time. But how she met her fate was not just the result of a collision between a liner and an iceberg. From the very day that she was designed, she was almost doomed. New scientific evidence reveals the chain of events that brought about the demise of a ship that was thought to be unsinkable and led to the death of over 1,500 people, the greatest maritime loss in modern history. There was a lot of questions surrounding what role the materials played in the sinking of the ship. For the first time, scientists believe they have uncovered the last piece of the puzzle that has baffled experts for almost half a century. A mystery that involves a fateful combination of design flaws and poor choice of shipbuilding materials that set the Titanic on a collision course with death and destiny. April 14th, 1912. In the dead of night, on a flat, calm sea, an extraordinary event is taking place. An iceberg with a mass of 500,000 tons drifts into the path of the Titanic.
Iceberg right ahead! Harder starboard!
They have seconds to react. At 11:39 p.m., Titanic scrapes the iceberg. Officers believe they have avoided disaster. But below the waterline, it is another story. News about the number of lives lost breaks one day after the disaster. Among the dead are some of the most wealthy and influential celebrities of the day, as well as hundreds of poor immigrants dreaming of a new life in America. Grieving relatives of the victims in Britain and the US are stunned and desperate to know how the impossible could have happened. The Titanic was designed to be the most luxurious and also the safest ship ever built. Even if rammed by another ship, she was designed to stay afloat. Yet she took only 2 hours to sink after colliding with an iceberg. Now, almost 100 years later, some questions still remain unanswered. Who or what was responsible? And why did the mightiest ship of her time sink so quickly? Forensic mythologist Jennifer Hooper McCarty is piecing together the events that took place on that fateful journey. She is re-examining forensic evidence recovered from the wreck, along with survivor testimony and archive records from 1912. We have very little knowledge of what that impact was like. What we do know is based only on the survivor testimony from 1912. 2 weeks after the sinking of the Titanic, a British public inquiry is held. A panel of judges will decide who was to blame for the disaster and loss of over 1,500 lives. The key witness is Bruce Ismay, the 50-year-old chairman of White Star, the owner of Titanic. He is one of the few men who survived the maiden voyage. Wireless operator Harold Bride and Second Officer Charles Lightoller also testify. These three men's testimony are vital in deciding who was to blame. I gather that you yourself gave the instructions for the building of the Titanic. Yes. And of course, you considered the question of floatability of the ship in cases of accident or emergency.
We did. Did you give any special consideration to the question of providing additional lifeboat accommodation? I think the position was taken that the ship was looked upon as being practically unsinkable. She was looked upon as a lifeboat herself. 2 years before the scheduled launch date, Ismay met with his chief designer, Alexander Carlisle. The staircase needs to be much grander, only bulkhead will have to be lowered. Is there a problem? Isn't she safe? Of course. Excuse me. The bulkheads are partitions used to create watertight compartments in the hull of the ship, each of which could be isolated and sealed off to contain flooding in the event of an emergency. The higher the bulkheads, the safer the ship, as it would be more likely that water could be contained within any damaged compartments. Each of the 16 compartments is watertight. In the event of a leak, each compartment can be sealed up by an electric power door operated from the bridge.
Belt kits in the height of the watertight compartments will be lowered to just 3 meters above the waterline. The boat deck should not be so cluttered. Cluttered, yes, cluttered. People don't pay to look at life bets. Well, I thought 48 to be a reasonable amount, especially if the Board of Trade increased the requirements. Well, let's not second-guess the British Board of Trade, shall we? Let's move on to the Grand Cellar. And this meeting with Miss Treese may lasted 4 hours. Yes, we talked about the whole of the decorations of the ship. Never mind the decorations, we're talking about lifeboats. Well, the lifeboat part is supposed to take about 5 or 10 minutes. How many lifeboats did you think there ought to be? I thought there ought to be 3 on each set of davits. And how many would that make altogether? 48 boats. You thought there ought to be 48. Yes. Whereas in point of fact, how many were there? 16. While the design of Titanic is being changed, 2,000 miles away, nature is unleashing a terrible force. A glacier made of 10,000-year-old snow reaches the ocean. A mass of ice weighing up to 2 million tons, the equivalent of over 5 Empire State Buildings, breaks free. It is just one of 40,000 icebergs born each year along the Greenland coast. Its chances of survival are small, but this iceberg is different. During the next 2 years, a bizarre chain of events, misjudgments, and human errors would set this iceberg and the Titanic on course to collide. 1 month later, the ocean currents carry
it on an incredible journey. Tens of thousands of icebergs break off of Greenland every year, come down the coast of Labrador and Newfoundland, and a very small percentage of those, maybe only 1 to 4%, will make their way to where they become a threat to shipping. As the iceberg continues up the West Greenland coast, work begins on the Titanic. It will take 2 years to build and be the largest man-made moving object in the world. Shipbuilding is in transition. Machines are replacing men, steel replacing iron. The vast hull of the Titanic is designed to be watertight by overlapping steel plates and 3 million rivets driven in using a hydraulic machine. But the machine is so cumbersome, it could be used only on straight sections of the ship. At the curved area of the bow, they had to drive rivets in manually. But steel rivets were too tough to hammer in, so instead they used wrought iron rivets, which are much more malleable. This will potentially weaken a small area of the bow section, but is a widespread practice, and nothing unusual has ever come of it. In the summer of 1911, the iceberg is now 18 months old and heading towards Baffin Bay, an area where most icebergs come to the end of their journey. All along the path of the movement of an iceberg, there are numerous bays and shallow water areas where icebergs can be trapped. Most of it is destroyed before it ever reaches as far south as the island of Newfoundland. But this iceberg manages to break free of Baffin Bay and continues its journey south over the next 6 months. Titanic is in the final stages of being fitted out. An army of carpenters and craftsmen are at work, creating the interior splendor of the ship. The captain chosen for the maiden voyage is Edward John Smith, the most experienced captain in the White Star Line. It is to be his last voyage before retiring. He was nicknamed the Millionaire's Captain. People like Guggenheim or even J.P. Morgan would actually change their sailings and their travel arrangements so that they could sail in a ship commanded by Captain Smith. March 1912, the Olympic, Titanic's sister ship, returns to port for emergency repairs. So the maiden voyage of the Titanic is pushed back a month. It will now be sailing in mid-April, the month when most icebergs appear in the shipping lanes in the North Atlantic. Against all odds, the iceberg that fell into the sea 2 years earlier has made it as far south as the east coast of Newfoundland, and it's still a colossus with a mass of over 500,000 tons, more than 10 times the weight of the Titanic. and it's drifting a further 17 kilometers a day, directly into the path of the major shipping lanes. Titanic leaves Belfast for Southampton, where it picks up its first passengers. But the unexpected delay of the Titanic's maiden voyage forces Captain Smith to make a last-minute reshuffle of his crew. Good afternoon, gentlemen. As you all know, the Olympic is currently laid up. It has therefore been decided that the Olympic's chief officer, Mr. Wilde, will be joining us as chief officer. So, Mr. Murdoch, you will now be first officer. Mr. Lighthauler, you will be second officer. Mr. Blair, I would like to have a word with you in private. Can you believe it? The arrival of officers from the Olympic means that Murdoch and Lighthauler are both demoted. Second Officer Blair is asked to leave the ship. Blair is so keen to get off the ship, he accidentally takes with him the key to his locker. It's a crucial oversight. His locker contains the binoculars for the lookouts in the crow's nest. The day before its maiden voyage to New York, the Titanic is given its final check by a British Board of Trade inspector. 16 standard lifeboats, passenger capacity 65, 70 if push comes to shove. Reducing the number of lifeboats to 16 means there is now only enough space for 1,000 people, fewer than half on board. The size of ocean liners had quadrupled in the 15 years before Titanic set sail, but the Board of Trade's lifeboat regulations remain the same. The Titanic is approved. 16 lifeboats is deemed satisfactory for over 20,000 people. RMS Titanic leaves Southampton docks for New York with 600 crew and over 1,500 passengers. Even though the Titanic is the latest in luxury liners, it isn't just carrying millionaires. Many are third-class passengers emigrating to the United States in search of a new life. One of those was Melvina Dean, then a 10-week-old baby traveling with her parents. My father was going to open a tobacconist shop in Kansas. He spent all his money on that, and then couldn't afford to do anything else. But getting third class, because it was such a luxury ship, all the millionaires were on it. And also, the most important thing was they said it was unsinkable. After picking up more passengers in France and Ireland, Captain Smith's plan is to cross the Atlantic in 6 days, drift even further southward towards the Grand Banks. Despite being eroded by the sea, it is still over 4 times the size of the Titanic. Approximately 1/8 of the mass of an iceberg is above the sea surface. The classic term, of course, is just the tip of the iceberg. Most of the mass is below the ocean surface, and unseen. What's above the surface is a relatively small portion of the ice. But back in 1912, ships have to rely on ice warnings from other vessels and from their lookouts in the crow's nest. The Titanic is already over halfway across the Atlantic. Her 200-foot-tall masts support aerials that allow her state-of-the-art wireless system to communicate with other ships up to 600 kilometers away. Senior wireless operator Jack Phillips is starting to receive ice warnings from other ships that are further to the west of them. The first ice warning of the day is from the liner the Coronia. It gives the location of an area of ice and icebergs that is 1 day away from the Titanic. Jack Phillips works a shift system with his assistant, Harold Bride. You were appointed by the Marconi Company to serve as assistant wireless operator on the Titanic? Yes. Was Mr. Phillips the senior operator? Yes. Bride and Phillips are not employed by the Titanic, but by Marconi. It was a long breakfast. Although they maintain communication with other ships, sending passenger messages is how they earn their money. Dear Jenny, Roger has proposed. Said yes. I'm frightfully worried. I said yes to Arthur before leaving. Love, Sis. First of many, no doubt. To drift even further southward towards the Grand Banks. Despite being eroded by the sea, it is still over 4 times the size of the Titanic. Approximately 1/8 of the mass of an iceberg is above the sea surface. The classic term, of course, is just the tip of the iceberg. Most of the mass is below the ocean's surface, and unseen. What's above the surface is a relatively small portion of the ice. But back in 1912, ships have to rely on ice warnings from other vessels and from their lookouts in the crow's nest. The Titanic is already over halfway across the Atlantic. Her 200-foot-tall masts support aerials that allow her state-of-the-art wireless system to communicate with other ships up to 600 kilometers away. Senior wireless operator Jack Phillips is starting to receive ice warnings from other ships that are further to the west of them. The first ice warning of the day is from the liner the Coronia. It gives the location of an area of ice and icebergs that is 1 day away from the Titanic. Jack Phillips works a shift system with his assistant, Harold Bride. You were appointed by the Marconi Company to serve as assistant wireless operator on the Titanic? Yes. Was Mr. Phillips the senior operator? Yes. Bride and Phillips are not employed by the Titanic, but by Marconi. It was a long breakfast. Although they maintain communication with other ships, sending passenger messages is how they earn their money. Dear Jenny, Roger has proposed. Said yes. I'm frightfully worried. I said yes to Othar before leaving. Love, Sis. First of many, no doubt.
The captain's attention. There will be 5 ice warnings during the day, but this will be the last that the captain will receive. 2 o'clock that afternoon, the captain hands the message to Ismay. Anyone would think we're heading towards the North Pole. 2 weeks after the disaster, the inquiry will attempt to prove that Ismay had wanted the captain to keep to schedule and ignore any ice warnings. Why do you think the captain handed you the Marconigram? As a matter of information. I take it you knew, of course, that the proximity of icebergs was a danger. You knew that much, did you not? There is always a danger with ice. And you knew that you would be in the region of ice sometime on that Sunday night. Yes. And therefore it behooved those who were responsible for the navigation of the ship to be very careful. Naturally. Would it not be necessary to slow down for icebergs? Presumably so, yes. Then what is the object of continuing at full speed through the night if you expect to meet ice? Why do you do it? I presume that the captain would be anxious to get through the ice region. He would not want to slow down upon the chance of a fog coming on. So the object of it is to get through it as fast as you could? I presume that if a man on a perfectly clear night could see far enough to clear an iceberg, then he would be perfectly justified in getting through the ice region as quickly as possible. Even somebody like Bruce Ismay would be deferential to the word of Captain Smith. Captain is everything on board a ship. He is God on board. His word is the word of God. The Titanic is heading in a direction away from the iceberg, but is about to change course. At 5:30 p.m., Captain Smith had planned a change in course from a southwesterly direction to a westerly direction. But because of the earlier ice warning from the Baltic, he delays the change in direction by 20 minutes to allow the ship to travel even further south towards a safe area of the Gulf Stream and away from the perilous ice region. South 86 west. Mr. Hitchens, steady she goes. Ironically, he has now put the Titanic on a direct collision course with the iceberg. It's because in 1912, a phenomenon took place that allowed icebergs to travel further south than was ever thought possible. The cold Labrador current has moved around the iceberg to form a protective layer, insulating it against the warming effects of the Gulf Stream and preventing it from melting. Now, everything depends on the path the Labrador current takes. The Labrador current goes where the Gulf Stream permits it to go.
Depending upon the exact location of the Gulf Stream, the cold water can move quite far to the south of the tail of the bank. If the Gulf Stream is southward moving, you have relatively cold water pushing very far south into the North Atlantic Ocean, into the shipping lanes. In recent years, icebergs have moved as far south as the latitude of Philadelphia. As the iceberg pushes its way into the shipping lanes, it's spotted by the Californian, who fires off iceberg pushes its way into the shipping lanes.
Warnings to the Titanic. While Phillips rested in the cabin next to the wireless room, his assistant, Bride, is manning the wireless. Although Bride heard the message from the Californian, he did not respond. Although you knew that you were called, you had something else to do. Yes, what business was it that you were attending to at the time? I was writing up the accounts. Wireless operators on the Titanic serve two functions. They relay weather reports and ice warnings, but they are also expected to keep a tally of all the passenger messages they send. At 7:20 p.m., Bride finishes his accounts, and then intercepts the message from the Californian. It warns of 3 large icebergs seen at latitude 42 north, longitude 49 west, directly in the path of the Titanic. It's for the captain. I'm going to the bridge. But Captain Smith has already left the bridge and is now dining with passengers. And you simply delivered it to an officer on the bridge? It's for the captain. Which officer? I can't remember. None of the surviving officers recall ever seeing this vital message. To this day, nobody knows if the message was delivered. With no reason to change course, Titanic steams ahead, straight into the path of the iceberg. April 14th, 1912. The Titanic heads towards the United States with over 2,000 passengers on board. Not only was the sea flat calm, but it was also a moonless night. A rare combination of conditions that make it difficult to see icebergs in the distance. As was the case for all passenger ships of the day, there was no official procedure for slowing down for ice. Traveling at almost full speed, the Titanic will reach the iceberg in 2 hours. But the officer's main concern is focused on small, low-lying icebergs, called growlers. All icebergs are dangerous, but actually a small iceberg, or a growler, which might only be the size of a small car, can be very dangerous. Granted, the risk of a ship colliding with it is probably lower, but the possibility that a ship would not see it is higher. Keep a sharp lookout for ice, particularly small ice and growlers.
Dead ahead! Aye, a big one!
Solid body of ice that is lower in the water and much more difficult to see than field ice or icebergs. What was the ship's speed? 21 knots is about 700 yards a minute. Is your view that you could see a growler at a safe distance at nighttime, going at that pace at night? Judge that I could see a growler at 1.5 miles or more, probably 2 miles. At 10 o'clock, Fleet and Lee start their watch in poor visibility. The lookouts are watching for growlers, unaware that the danger ahead is from a large iceberg. Over its 2-year journey, the iceberg has reduced in size, but it is still 30 meters high, the same height as the crow's nest. The Titanic steams ahead at a top speed of 40 kilometers per hour. Captain Smith checks the bridge before retiring for the night. It's cold. Yes, it is cold, sir. Not much wind either. No, sir. As a matter of fact, it's a flat calm. Yes, a flat calm. You both realized at the time that since it was a flat calm, it would be more difficult to see the ice? As far as the case of the berg is concerned, yes, it will be much more difficult. Naturally, you wouldn't see the water breaking on it if there were no wind, so you would not have that to look for. There should be a certain amount of reflected light from the iceberg, sir. Yes, providing it remains clear. If it becomes at all doubtful, let me know.
Every ship that crosses the Atlantic Ocean, Phillips is under a tight deadline and has only a 2-hour window to send every passenger message, while the Titanic is in range of the Cape Race receiver at Newfoundland.
he is interrupted by the fifth and the most critical ice warning of the day. It is from another ship, the SS Masaba, giving the precise location of an area containing icebergs that is now only 80 kilometers away from the Titanic. This would alert the captain that the Titanic is heading straight towards the iceberg, but the warning came without the critical MSG prefix. Phillips interprets the message as non-urgent and goes back to sending passenger messages. The closest ship to the Titanic, the Californian, sends a message to say that they have stopped for the night because of ice. But their wireless operator has not waited for Phillips to stop sending his messages and overrides it with a powerful signal. Phillips replies to tell the Californian to stop sending ice warnings while he's busy with passenger messages. Who is it? California keeps sending weather reports. I'm still planning through this lot. You want me to take over when I go back to sleep? You can take over at 12. I'm not working past midnight. I'm knackered. The Californian's response is to turn off its wireless equipment for the night. The Titanic has now lost radio contact with the only ship less than 2 hours away. By 11:30 p.m., the iceberg is just 6 kilometers away, traveling at 40 kilometers an hour. The Titanic will collide with it in 10 minutes. The earlier decision by Officer Blair to leave with the keys to the binoculars locker now comes into play. Lookouts Fleet and Lee have to rely on their own eyesight. Can you explain to my lord my glasses were not provided for the lookout men on the Titanic? No, I could not offer any explanation. If it had been a matter in your discretion, would you have provided the men? Had they been on the ship? I might have done. Had your glasses on the bridge? We had. So there would be from time to any time during the whole course of the voyage a pair of glasses available? On the bridge. On the bridge, which could have been handed up or given to the lookout man. If there had been glasses in the crow's nest, would you have used them? Yes, constantly. Yes. After all, you are the man who discovered the iceberg. Yes. If it was necessary to have glasses, do you not think you should have gone to the bridge or telephoned to the bridge and said, I am told to keep a sharp lookout and I have not got any glasses? They would know that. But you did not call their attention to it. No, I did not. Do you think that if you had had glasses, you could have seen the iceberg sooner? Certainly. How much sooner do you think you could have seen it? It's time for the ship to get out of the way. So that it is your view that if you had had glasses, it would have made all the difference between safety and disaster. Yes. It's a minor. It's a major Orion. The iceberg is 100 meters away and closing in on the Titanic. Scouts still have not seen it because the sea is a flat calm. Without binoculars, it's impossible for the lookouts to spot an iceberg until it's right on top of them. Ice spike right ahead! Harder starboard! After putting the ship's engines into reverse, Murdoch's instinct is to steer away from the iceberg. From the bridge, it looks like they've had a lucky escape. The collision is so gentle that many of the passengers and crew sleep through it. Forensic metallurgist Hooper McCarty will be pivotal in finding out why such a gentle collision results in such devastating consequences. The first place to look will be the survivor testimonies, and one in particular would catch her attention. Some people barely felt it. Some explained it as sort of a glancing blow, a shudder, but not something that moved them across the ship. Fireman Barrett was one of the most important pieces of testimony. He talked about being standing in boiler room number 6 and seeing water coming in. Your name is Frederick Barrett.
Yes. Now, just tell us what happened that you saw in the stokehold.
A red light goes on when the ship's supposed to stop. Well, this red light came on. I'm the man in charge of the watch. I called out, "Shut all dampers." What was the next thing that happened? The crash happened before we had the... Where was this crash? Water came pouring in, 2 feet above the stokehold plate. Can you point to where that is on the ship? The ship's side was torn from the third stokehold to the forward end. This was the clue, Hooper.
Party had
Target
been
acquired.
looking
The
for
hull plating
firemen.
is heavily deteriorated.
I'm deploying
Barrett's
the arm to
testimony
collect the rivets.
suggests that
Confirmed,
the
the
damage
light is
wasn't
revealing the
due
damage
to
seams.
fracture
This
mid-plate
rivet shows
or
extreme
within the
corrosion.
hull
It's a key
plates.
piece.
Instead, it suggests that there may be something wrong with the seams. Maybe the question was really in the rivets, the quality of the rivets. To find out, she decides to analyze all 46 rivets retrieved in 1998 during an expedition to the wreck of the Titanic. She makes an amazing discovery and gets closer to solving the mystery.
Yes, women and children first. Yes, let's do that, sir. Lighthauler will later misinterpret the captain's command with terrible consequences. 2-month-old Melvina Dean is one of the few third-class passengers to make it into a lifeboat. Now 96, she is the last living survivor. Lots of people thought the ship was unsinkable, so they just stayed. My father was very quick on the uptake. He got us immediately up on deck. You can't just stand around here, okay? No need to panic, just one at a time into the lifeboat. Women and children only, sir. And then my mother. Say goodbye to my father. And they'd only been married about 4 years. And so she's so brokenhearted that she would never speak about it. Because I was small, they couldn't hold me and had to put me in a sack. Women and children only, sir. Lighthauler interprets Captain Smith's orders as women and children only fired away. And that allowed unnecessary deaths, caused unnecessary deaths. Many of the lifeboats are launched half
Empty. Ismay is on the starboard boat deck helping women and children get into the last lifeboat. Did you see how many passengers were put into this lifeboat? No, I did not see at the time. Did she appear to be full? She was very full as she was being lowered away. There was no order to you to get in? No, none. Ismay is one of the few men to take a place in the lifeboats. The last lifeboat leaves with over 1,600 people left on board the Titanic and stay afloat for only 30 more minutes. Time is rapidly running out. The Titanic is sinking. In only 30 more minutes, she will be on the ocean floor. Then you've done your full duty. You can do nothing more. Abandon your cabin. It's every man for himself now, the captain said. We are to leave. Just a moment. While there is still electricity on board, Phillips tries to stay in communication with the Carpathia, updating her of the Titanic situation. What is it? The Frankfurt's interfering with the Carpathian signal, although there are enough life jackets. To go around the chaos on the ship means that many are left without bride. We'll later tell of a stoker from the boiler room who was forced to take desperate measures. Por favor, it's not moving. Let him rot. Captain Smith is last seen in the bridge. He will go down with the ship. Over 2 hours after the collision with the iceberg, the Titanic sinks to the bottom of the ocean. Bride is one of 1,500 people that are plunged into the icy sea. How did you come off from the boat deck? I was swept off with a collapsible boat. And was the water rising all the time? Yes. And then the water was flush with the boat deck. Yes. And swept this boat off into the sea, and you with it. Yes. The last I saw in Phillips, he was standing on the deck house. So, then you found yourself in the water. What happened next? I swam away from the Titanic. When somebody goes in the water, especially very cold water, the first thing they're going to experience is panic and shock. As soon as you're subjected to water temperatures that are freezing or near freezing, as they undoubtedly were that night, disorientation and exhaustion and unconsciousness are likely within the first 15 minutes. And survival is only likely for 15 to 45 minutes. Your core temperature starts to go down. It's just a matter of time before hypothermia sets in. Whether you die because of the cold or you drown, it's an awful way to die. The best thing that somebody can do is to get out of the water, if you can.
An upturned lifeboat. They are eventually picked up by another lifeboat. 2 hours after the Titanic sinks, the Carpathia arrives in the early morning light to rescue passengers. Bride survives, suffering only frostbite in his feet. But the Carpathia arrives too late for his friend and colleague, Phillips, who dies in the sea. Of the 1,523 that died on April 14, 1912, only 328 bodies are recovered. Most are buried in a cemetery in Halifax. Many of the bodies cannot be identified and are simply marked with a number.
They have found some of their bodies and took them to Halifax, but they never found my father's. You know, you're stopping and you wonder, what happened to him? If he jumped overboard, or if he'd gone down the ship, or you have no idea what's happened, which is quite awful. It was mostly men who died, but that doesn't mean it was only men. That was part of the tragedy, that there were women and children in the water and not in the lifeboats, was a part of that tragedy. There were quite a few
Women who did not make it into the lifeboats. Roger that. Thank you. You are clear. To make sure this never happens again, the International Ice Patrol is set up after the Titanic tragedy. One of the things we do every year is deploy wreaths as close to the position that the Titanic sank as possible. It is with the great respect and reverence that we commemorate the anniversary of the sinking of the RMS Titanic here in the North Atlantic 96 years ago. And we remember the importance of our mission. We remember the over 1,500 souls who...
I can still hear the screams.
The water was so cold.
So many faces lost forever.
We were the lucky ones.
The findings of the inquiry were that the ship was traveling at excessive speed in an ice region, but that none of the crew were to blame. They were only carrying out standard practice for the time. It was recommended that in future, the number of lifeboats on the ship should be enough for all persons on board.